I love it. So, like you said, I have a 19-year-old son. He's in college, kicking ass, but he's on the spectrum, and he's a different kind of dude. So, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you come from, and tell us your story.
Well, my father, he's from Chile, and he's in the aerospace engineering industry for a long time. Doing testing on all kinds of different stuff. We set up past the ionosphere, and he, we didn't have much of a relationship at the very beginning, just because him and my mom kind of split ways. So I kind of had that experience of growing up with a single parent, and I had to go and see him in the summers and stuff like that, but that was two separate lives. And for me, that was just fine because I really enjoyed the solitude, being an only child. Um, my mother and my grandmother were both music teachers, and there was like 40 families a week in the house. So it was nuts. I would come home from school and there would be three or four kids like in my room playing with and breaking my toys and stuff, just because they were trying to keep them busy while the lesson was going on. If they were siblings or whatever, and any kind of invasion of my space, any forced social interaction in school, especially was awful. And when you're on the spectrum, you're very, very different. I was like 75% nonverbal until I was like, 11 or so. And kids can pick up on that, and kids are always trying on different personas, when they're growing up. They need to understand what being cruel is like. They need to play around with ego and social hierarchy and all of that. And when you're different and you don't follow the status quo, that can make you really others. So I was pretty savagely bullied when I was growing up, just for being different. And I had a lot of communication problems. I knew that I wanted to have relationships with the other kids and to have friends and stuff like that, but I didn't know what that looked or sounded like. And I remember at one point I was like 8 or 9 years old, and because I couldn't talk to the kids, and I wanted to be close to them, and I had kind of a twisted idea of what being close to someone was like. So I chased the other kids around in the playground trying to kiss them. I didn't have any of the social mores that would normally be in someone, and I didn't understand what it was supposed to look like. And I think that one of the things that's different when you're growing up with there's that disconnect. We operate off of a lot of assumptions, things that are pretty easy if they're hardwired into you, and when they're not, it kind of feels like you're an alien. You're growing up and you feel so different from everyone else, and you try over and over and over again to make friends, make connections, and you blunder and you make really silly mistakes. One of the traits of ASD is we can have a lot of difficulty with sarcasm or facial expressions, or and when I was first learning to talk, my tone would go up and down. I had a lot of difficulty controlling the tone of my voice. So I was just really socially awkward. And as I got older, that kind of manifested itself in almost a kind of misanthropy. I was almost angry at the world around me for pushing me away. And I had to deal with that, and because I wasn't able to deal with it when I was younger, because I was so overwhelmed, I ended up having to deal with it in my early 20s. I had a lot of difficulty doing a lot of basic things for myself. I was that kid who didn't wash their hair enough, who would smell their clothes and just see if it was okay to put back on. I didn't understand that wearing the same outfit, for 5 days in a row would get me picked on. And I think the best way to describe what having ASD is like is it's kind of like being forced to look at the whole world through a magnifying glass all the time. And so you hyper focus. When you find something that you like, you spend all of your time, effort, and energy looking at that thing, completely neglecting everything else. And it makes it very, very difficult to kind of linearly grow all of the different parts of yourself at once. And when I got to be about 15 or so, I had a conflict with my mom because for a long time, because my mother had left my father. We were staying with my grandmother, and my grandmother raised 5 kids. So to her, having a meal on the table and doing some laundry and stuff like that for one kid was just a snap of her fingers. But my mom, she was completely overwhelmed. She was sitting there trying to be a single parent and being a music teacher and having none of her own time. And so as a result, it was like when she wanted to move, away with me, I dug my heels in. I didn't want to because I didn't really have a relationship with my mother at that point. She was working so hard to be able to put food on the table that she was like a stranger to me almost. And the prospect of leaving that environment where I was taken care of and I did have food on the table every night and all of that, that was something. Change is also very, very hard when you have autism. So the prospect of moving into a different house and having all of the rules change, and I think that was one of the other reasons that I didn't realize at the time I was so resistant. And the ultimate result of that conflict was that I went to go live with my father for the last couple of years of high school. And that was a completely different experience because he was down in Southern California and, working in the aerospace industry. And I was, basically down in Long Beach, California. Went from a tiny little town with 4,000 people in it to, being right there on the cusp of Los Angeles and having to take public transportation. And I think that getting immersed in all kinds of different environments and stuff, there's a big resistance to it at first when you have ASD. But it was that very thing, being forced to cope with all of that change constantly, that started to make me, aware that something was missing at least. And then when I went into after I graduated high school, I thought maybe that it was the time for me to do something for myself, to just go off and be my own person. And so I joined the Navy, and this was, I'm showing my age here, but this is back in 1998, and I went in and I didn't have a problem with the academics. The exercise was great. But again, the social hierarchy, making friends, relationships, understanding humor, all of that was a problem. And after I graduated boot camp, which is a big deal for me. I mean, graduation day, you're real proud. You're in your uniform there and you're really feeling it. Because I had people in my family who thought, he's gonna crash and fail out of that. So being able to, stand there at attention and be really proud of where I came was awesome for me. I love being in the military. And when I transitioned from that into a tech course, like pre-A school, I started having a lot more of the social problems again that I was having in high school. And the difference was, growing up with a single parent versus being in the military is, I went on base and went and was talking to doctors and therapists and all that stuff. And eventually, they said, well, I mean, there's a bunch of different possibilities here. We can't give you an outright diagnosis, but we're pretty sure that you've got autism. And it's fairly, it's affecting your life in a big way. Because at that point, I was 19 years old and I never had my driver's license. I couldn't drive. A lot of problems. And once they told me that, it kind of took me back. I had to take a deep breath and think, because they said that some people who are on the spectrum, they can survive in the military environment, others can't. At this point, just to put things into perspective, it was only a couple of years before that they had added even the Asperger's diagnosis to the DSM. So this was that generation before, we were writing prescriptions like playing cards to kids and diagnosing them all with ADHD and all of that. So I had never given pause to the fact that, maybe there was something psychologically different or developmentally different or cognitively different about me. And they told me, you can stay if you want to, see if you can, handle the changes and stuff like that. But because this is a pre-existing condition that could have, disqualified you from service, if you want to leave, you can. And I sat and I spent a lot of time about it. And for a good bit, I was just going to go ahead and pull the trigger on just staying in. And then one of my friends came to me and he said, well, if you're hyper-focused on stuff and you're having all these problems, what if, something that you do or something that you failed to do, out in deployment or something like that ends up, it ends up hurting someone? Are you going to be okay with the fact that you, got hyper-focused on a circuit board or a terminal or breaking a code or something like that, and then, you ended up costing someone their life? This is brand new information for you. And I took that advice to heart. It was a big blow to me to leave the military because it was such a big accomplishment for me independence. But after being in for about 7 months, I made a decision, and I went ahead and separated, and they gave me general discharge under honorable conditions and all of that. They call it an entry level separation. I don't think I don't call myself a veteran or anything like that, just because I just went in for food and the training, and I never got to see duty or anything. And I don't like that whole stolen valor idea of that. I feel like that's disingenuous. But that experience taught me that I needed to understand myself. I have to understand what's going on with me and work on that and be willing to fail if I want to step out of that. And it's been a process. My early 20s were full of a lot of failures. Because I didn't even know how to do facial expressions or understand humor, or it was bad. It was really bad. And
So, like something you said, I want to touch on. Like my son, thank God, he was hyper focused on animals. That was his thing, and now he's going to school to be a marine biologist. That's been his thing since he's been 2 years old. So talk to us, because a lot of people, like a lot of parents, are like, "Oh, my kid's so focused on music or whatever it is," and instead of talking, hey, maybe that might be something that you'd be really interested in. Let's double down on it. They kind of try to take it away, and it gets the child even angrier, right?
yeah, well, I mean, you develop special interests. One of the things about walking around the whole world with a magnifying glass in your pocket and not having a lot of really distracting social relationships is you can get obsessive about topics, and it can manifest itself in lots of different ways. It's depending on the level of social awkwardness too. You could talk to someone with ASD and end up having an involuntary one-sided conversation with someone about Pokemon for 5 hours or something like that. So special interests, those are it's an interesting facet of autism. Hans Asperger called them little professors, because they would find a topic that they were into, and then they would just deep dive into it. For me, when I was younger, it was words, the philology of words, the taxonomical roots of words, and I really sabotaged myself with that, because one of the things about social appropriateness is being able to use the language that is appropriate to your audience. And you don't write a novel for teenage girls the same way that you write a business book for entrepreneurs. You have to think about your audience. And I othered people for so long with my vocabulary. I think that it gave me a problem, because the combination of me being intelligent and having a fairly expansive vocabulary was that I constantly came off to other people as if I was condescending. And the other traits of ASD, accidentally having one-sided conversations, failing to recognize social reciprocity, hypercommunication, being super loquacious, getting attached to neologisms or funny words, or I think that can set you at a disadvantage with other people too. For me, my special interests were, words. I got into mathematics, which was helpful later on, solving puzzles, breaking codes, and then it kind of branched out from there. And I got interested in magic. I think I got socially envious of magicians, just like comedians, because they have the ability to be so likable, and for people to enjoy their presence so much and get such a kick out of them. And so at first I tried to do just that. I tried to learn how to tell jokes and stuff. I have a pretty crazy memory from ASD, so I remember almost every joke that's ever been told to me since I was 10 years old. Problem is that when you have autism, you don't always necessarily know what's socially appropriate. And so I would tell inappropriate jokes all the time and offend people, or not be able to read the room, or not realize that I was making a joke in response to someone sharing a feeling and they wanted reciprocity and listening, or I would start telling jokes when I felt socially uncomfortable, and then I realized that was all the time. And when I went into magic, that was really funny, because I got up to the point where I was literally doing magic on the mezzanine level of the Silver Legacy with this awesome guy named Doc Cheatham. And I started to realize that the better I got at close-up illusion, the more I hated it, because because I would get more attention from people, and I started gathering a crowd, and I couldn't handle it. I only wanted to do it one-on-one with other people, so I certainly couldn't be an entertainer. It was interesting. Special interests are an interesting thing. I think that when I got to my mid-20s and I realized that if I wanted to really have friends and interact with people and be able to have a social life, that I was going to have to redesign the way that I chose to express myself and how I wanted to express my personality to others and how vulnerable I was willing to be with other people about my difficulties. And that process is what ended up making psychology and cognitive neuroscience into a special interest for me.
Yep.
And that's what I've been doing now for the last, 18 years.
And I love that. Now, I have, like I said, I have multiple people in my family that are on the spectrum, and I love them all. And it's amazing how different they can be. Like some of them want to be hugged. They want to, they want that interaction. And then some of the other ones, you go to touch them and they kind of like, they have that whole sensory
avoidance. And sensory issues are, one of the really overwhelming things with ASD. I think that the general public thinks about two things when they think about autism. One, if they're not thinking about, like, if they're from a generation where they watched, the performance in Rain Man, maybe they think about that.
Yeah.
But they'll either think about meltdowns,
Mm-hmm.
or they'll think about echolalia. So echolalia is when we, repeat a sound, or we'll do something to self-comfort, we'll rock, and we'll make sounds, and I do that too. So we like the way that certain sounds sound. It can be soothing, and the problem with having a magnifying glass all the time is what happens when you look at a bright light. When you get a particular kind of stimulation that your brain grabs onto, it overwhelms everything else. I had to learn how to cut my own hair. I'm a grown man. I'm over 40, and I have to cut my own hair because I can't handle someone else touching me for that long. I can't do it. So I had to get good at cutting my own hair. When I finally got my driver's license, which, by the way, I didn't get until I was 37, that was a big accomplishment for me. I can't have the radio on. I can't have anyone talking to me. I can't roll the window down because of the sound of the wind and the feeling of the wind on my face. I have a timing system worked out so I can keep looking at all of the mirrors and the speedometer and be situationally aware and make sure I'm spacing the cars and where am I going. And I had to create a system for that, just like I had to create a system for being able to interact with other people. Sensory issues are also tied to the part of the brain. We're doing lots of new research now on what causes sensory seeking or sensory avoidant issues, and what parts of your neurobiology are different. And you have between, depending on which source you go with, between 40 and 66% of people with autism have a comorbidity with attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Yeah. And that can actually be one of the things that takes you from sensory avoidance to sensory seeking, because your hyperfixations also get tied to dopamine a little bit. And we could talk more about that later, but I think one of the common misconceptions about dopamine is that it's like a pleasure neurotransmitter, and it's more about, it's what causes you to take action. If you're thirsty and you see a glass of water, dopamine is what gives you the gumption to go up and pick up the glass of water and drink it. Now, it might not be water, it might be vodka, it could be turpentine. Your brain's just looking at the situation and recognizing past patterns of behavior. But dopamine reprogramming is one of the most important things that I think I learned from having ASD that I've been able to share with other people, because it can change your whole world.
I love it. Like, I've had one of my friends on, his name is Tucker Bearden. He's one of the most prolific speakers that I've ever heard. And he's on the spectrum, and he talks about it. And he says sometimes when he was younger, he'd walk into a room and there'd be a lot of people, and it seemed like he was just listening to every single conversation, and he had to walk out. He said, because it was like being God. Like, you ever watched that movie about being God, where you're listening to all these people at the same time, and he had to walk out of the room. Is that how you felt?
Yeah, filtering input. And that's one of the problems with sensory issues is you can't, I can't, when you're sitting at a table in a restaurant and you're focused on the person who's in front of you, a neurotypical, a normal person will be able to kind of filter out the background noise and focus their cognition on what's going on. But you can't do that with ASD. You're kind of forced to look at everything at the same time. It's like being able to be in a visually distracting place. You have to actually limit your field of vision. Otherwise, it can end up causing, I went out of focus there. It can end up causing all kinds of issues. And I think that's one aspect of it. Like I just learned recently that I'm actually able to be on a roller coaster. I wasn't able to do roller coasters for a long time. And what I have to do is I have to put on really, really dark sunglasses. And if I do that, then the visual input lessens enough. And that's what that's been like. Is you have to filter in your input. So people with ASD with sensory avoidant issues will use earplugs, noise canceling headphones, limiter, field of vision limiting glasses. We like textures, so we'll wear clothing or coverings that have an appealing texture, maybe like a strange garb. And it's the same thing with food. People who have ASD. It's not even about the taste; it's about the texture. If a food has the wrong texture,
Yeah.
If things are touching one another on the plate and it affects, something, small changes can destabilize you. And that's why it's important for a person who's on the spectrum to have a safe haven to retreat to, so that they can take some deep breaths and figure out, what the antecedent is. What is it that caused the emotional dysregulation? Okay, we had a meltdown. Why? You can't always figure out why in the moment because we're overwhelmed. Our cognition isn't functioning the right way. But then, after the fact, we can identify what the antecedent of that behavior was. What was it that took me to that place? How did I respond? How did it make me feel? And being able to diagnose and pull apart that stuff is what will help you not to avoid having involuntary reactions, because those are involuntary, they're going to happen no matter what. But if you can recognize the kinds of situations that put you into that place, then you can go in better armed, better prepared. If you go to a rock concert, that the smells are going to bother you and that there's going to be too much sound at once, well, then you get some good earplugs and maybe put a little bit of Vicks vapor rub in your nose, and you've got less to deal with. Maybe you're going to have a much better time with that experience. But you can only do that once you start to get invested in the process of diagnosing yourself, of how I got there. And I think that's one of the biggest transitions into adulthood when you have ASD, is getting that self-management, understanding yourself, being willing to acknowledge that you have those issues and taking charge of them, being willing to use that failure to prepare yourself upwards. And I think that that's something that you have to learn if you want to be able to function in society.
All right. So before we go on, I want to thank our sponsors. As you guys know, I love always paying it forward. So we came out with brand new T-shirts, brand new hats, and the T-shirt says, "Today I decide," because I believe those are the three most important words in the English language. Because once you make a decision, all you have to do is act upon it. And whether you fail or whether you succeed, it's all based on your decisions. So every time you buy the T-shirt, 100% of the proceeds go to help veterans struggling with PTSD and homelessness. So I make no money off of it, but it's all about paying it forward. And if you guys love watching us on StreamYard, if you guys want to start your own business, StreamYard, I actually have a coupon for you. They'll let you try the first month for free. So if you like what we're doing, just type StreamYard and I'll send you the info. But now I want to talk a little bit about...
I was actually homeless for 11 months, Richard.
Yeah, like I said, that's what I want to talk about. It first of all is, I might have a lot of parents talking and they're like listening to us and they're like, what can I do for my child? So as a 40-year-old male, what do you think that parents can start doing once they find out their children are on the spectrum?
Well, every flavor of ASD is a little different. How verbal are they? Are they sensory seeking or are they sensory avoidant? Are there any comorbid conditions, cognitive or developmental conditions that are running parallel with what they're experiencing that are complicating things? And then what are their goals? What makes them happy? And then are your goals for them? And I think it's about securing buy-in. One of the first things that you've got to do, I think, when you're dealing with someone younger, is you have to help them focus on things that they want to do and want to change. Because the easiest way to learn the strategies that you'll need to learn to be able to overcome challenges and difficulties is to start by working on things that actually bring you joy. Because not everything in life is a pleasure to work on. Maybe the first time you do your taxes, or you've got to deal with a noisy neighbor who has parties at 2 o'clock in the morning. Those things are worth your effort and it will make your life better, but it's also stressful. And so when you can start to learn how to apply behavioral changes, approach challenges, come up with an approach, respond to failure, and be able to reprogram that and move towards success with what you've learned. I think the place to start with that as a younger person is with the things that bring you excitement. Because if you do that, then you learn things without all of the other negative associations that come with something that you're trying to avoid. And getting away from preferred activities can be very, very difficult for young people with ASD. They're whatever their preferences are, whether it's being alone or watching a particular cartoon at a particular time of day, we get the safety of routine, and it can help make that overwhelming world feel better. And understanding what that looks like for a person on the spectrum is really important. I think understanding, I would say this for all psychological diagnoses, especially those that are based on either genetics or differences in actual brain physiology, that you can't assign, there's a temptation to, especially over time, you can't assign symptoms as character traits. If you have a partner that has ADHD and they have a lot of difficulty being able to give you all of their attention, they're always looking at their phone, or they're changing the subject, or they don't let you finish your sentences because something that you said has sparked something and they start going off in a different direction. If you make the decision, especially if you've been exposed to them for a long time, and so you take it for granted that they're doing that on purpose, then you're going to change the way that you think and feel about them and how you interact with them, and you're going to sabotage them. And I think that part of ableism is not being able to recognize that some things are not people's fault, and that it's not necessarily a question of nature. And when it's a visible disability, when you have a friend who's in a wheelchair, you don't resent him for not getting up and helping you carry something up and down the stairs, or offering to help you move. But you may really take it personally when your partner or your friend with ADHD forgets your birthday, or accidentally reneges on a promise, or ends up, maybe they have ASD and they start hyper-focusing on something, or maybe you're talking about something that's really important to you, and it sparks that one. If you got that one-sided conversation with a special interest, that's not really a great example of empathy, and that will invalidate people. But that's not a character trait. That's something that person has no control over. And you can strategize. You can learn how to avoid situations. You can learn to recognize triggers. You can try and dissect, the plane crash after, try to avoid getting yourself into the same place. And that's a slow process. But if you, whether it's your child or your peer or anyone, if you assign character traits that are features of a disability, you will not only make that person feel guilt and shame over being themselves and over things that they have no control over, but you will allow your specific emotional narrative with that person to be damaged because of something that they have no control over. And I think that that's a lesson that we all have to learn. I don't know if you've ever had the experience of having a parent try to teach you something. But sometimes parents are the worst person to teach you, because you're trying to, as a child, seek approval. You're trying to, there's a hierarchy, there's an established interaction, and there's a different kind of interaction that happens when you're teaching someone. And sometimes trying to put on both of those hats at the same time can damage your relationship. So be open to involving a third party. This isn't just about you learning how to quote unquote deal with your child. Sometimes they're going to need a peer group, a role model, don't be offended if it's not you. Maybe they need certain things from you that are really, really important but conflict with that. So being open to that, being open to new techniques, being open to not judging, behavior as a character trait with someone who has a disability. I think all of those are important precepts for moving forward. And then I think the other part of it is that there's a lot of things that happen with disabilities, whether they're intellectual, psychological, emotional, that are very, very frustrating for family members. And it can generate resentment with siblings. It can make it very, very difficult when, because regardless of whether or not it's someone's fault, it doesn't mean that you don't have feelings. If your autistic friend forgets your birthday because they were hyper-focused on something, they didn't do that on purpose, but that doesn't mean that the fact that you feel something is wrong. You're going to have an emotional response. If you ignore the fact that you're having that response, then that also means that you can't take ownership over it and decide whether or not it affects your behavior. So I think that having a therapist or a friend, being able to vent the way that you feel, but not take it out on the person if it's not their responsibility, if it's not something that they can change, for the help of your own emotional processing, I think that's also very, very healthy. And support groups are really helpful too, because you can all learn from one another, especially if someone has a worse challenge, a harder challenge than we do. Sometimes our takeaway from that is to understand a better way to be able to process or deal with that challenge.
And I totally agree. And I'm just sitting here going, yeah, I get it. I'm living it. My son's 19 years old now. But now let's flip the script, because whether it's true or not, or as a parent, and now I'm hanging out with a lot of people that are millionaires and billionaires and successful people. I see some people kind of like Elon Musk. I'm not saying he is, not saying he isn't, but there's certain people that looks like they're on the spectrum, and they seem to be so successful because they do have that hyper focus, and they kind of flip the script. Like me, I had severe ADHD in high school. Horrible student. Never thought I was going to write a best-selling book, but until I learned that I can use ADHD as my superpower, and that's how I crushed it in sales, was by using my ADHD for my good. I know some people that actually flipped the script on having Asperger's, and now they're crushing it because they can hyperfocus. Have you ever talked to anybody, or are you that guy?
That's kind of my story, is that, I got into my mid-20s and I didn't really have any friends. I'd gone on like one date at like 19. I didn't have any of the social relationships that I really wanted to. Felt very socially isolated. I had gotten myself into this bad habit of being really unhappy with who I was. And so I felt like pretending to be someone other than who I was the way to go. And there's two problems with that. One is that inherently, you're being dishonest all the time. And that, unfortunately, when you start to look at dishonesty as a way to solve problems, every time you have a problem, you'll want to use it. And that's a terrible thing. That was an awful trend. But then the second part of that is that if you do misrepresent yourself in order to be able to build relationships to meet your emotional and psychological needs, then the only thing you're really going to do is give yourself imposter syndrome. Because then when you do get that positive affirmation from other people, you will always question whether or not you would actually get it if they knew who you really were. And it will make you secretly hate yourself. For a long time, I think a lot of people with ASD have this experience. Spend a whole bunch of time and effort learning how to pretend to be neurotypical. And that's really a double-edged sword. On the one side, it can help you start to understand the social dynamics and help you understand, it's kind of like an anthropologist putting on loincloth and walking with the tribe for a week and seeing, studying them a little bit. There is an upside to that. But the downside is that you will be punished socially for even the smallest misstep because you haven't been honest about your challenges. So if I pretend to be neurotypical and I'm sitting down and I have a conversation, I'm putting a lot of effort into it, and then I fail at recognizing sarcasm or a facial expression or an opportunity for emotional reciprocity, or I accidentally have a one-sided conversation about a topic in my life, that person is now going to assign a whole bunch of bad character traits to you because you haven't even given them the opportunity to understand that there's something different. And what I've found, and this has been a little mind-blowing for me, is that if you're willing to share your challenges with other people, not in a negative way, as a point of positivity, just to build rapport, to share, to talk about your experience, then to let them know, hey, this can happen. If it happens, just point it out. I'm not doing it on purpose, and what you have to say is important to me. If you do that, people will respect you more for the challenges that you face and overcome. People will have a deeper appreciation for what you've had to go through, and they're much less likely to punish you for things that are beyond your control because you've given them the opportunity to understand. And so what I learned from going through that whole process is that pretending to be neurotypical is actually a huge disadvantage for me. There are certain things that I had to learn for the sake of communication. This is great too because my cup was empty. This is why I teach C-suites and entrepreneurs and stuff about communication, negotiation, emotional dynamics, interpersonal dynamics. Is that you learn so much when you don't have any automatic behaviors. I think that one of the things about getting emotional sapience and communicative sapience is that sometimes even if you're good at something, you don't do it on purpose. And you don't know how to use that to your benefit or your advantage. And when you're doing it with intent, it's very, very different than doing it as a point of natural reaction.
I love it. So, like I said, I'm so grateful that now you're in my inner circle. I loved your episode with Steve Sims. That was amazing. I'm going to be able to hang out with Steve Sims coming up soon. Tammy, I think, is the one that introduced us. Tammy girl, hashtag.
Thanks, great.
Hashtag Queen. So talk to us about what you're doing now, and how we can support your mission.
Well, for about 7 years or so, I did sales and training and negotiation training and all that kind of stuff and managing for Kay and Jared, the Gallery of Jewelers, and Gallery of Jewelry. And I got to learn, and I was so afraid of that industry because it all has to do with emotions. It all has to do with social narrative. Yeah. And I said, you know what? I'm going to jump into that feet first. I'm going to do it. And it's going to teach me more about the things that are hardest for me. And it did. And the end result of that is that I ended up getting to share the techniques that I've had to learn, to be able to come out of my shell, to learn how to communicate from having ASD and trying to overcome that challenge. I get to take those same lessons now and teach, psychosocial dynamics, sociological dynamics, interpersonal dynamics, emotional dynamics to C-suites, entrepreneurs, have a better understanding of their customer avatar, the psychology behind their customer avatar, how their customers' hopes, dreams, fears play into the way that they should present their narrative, their product, themselves. Having an understanding of the neuroscience of color, how color causes different physiological changes in us, dopamine reprogramming, again, for personal success. So many things that I only study for my own benefit. I now have the opportunity for building those systems of knowledge to share with others. And so I do private consulting for high-stakes negotiation training, for professional communication, for design and feedback, for like the neuroscience of color, psychological impressions of website content. I've also been doing copywriting for about 17 years. So the process of me going through that has given me a lot to offer on a bunch of different industries. And so what I do is I schedule a 90-minute call with someone who wants my help, and I have them come to me with all of their challenges, all of their problems, and then we dissect everything and come up with a plan of action. And then from that point forward, they can decide if they want to work with me and pay for sessions or not. And what I found is that when a person sees what I have to offer, because it can be very difficult to understand or even explain how psychology, applied behavioral psychology and cognitive neuroscience can help your brand, can help you as an entrepreneur, help you with understanding your customer. It feels nebulous because you don't know what it looks like, and so you don't know why you want it. And what I found is that when people unlock that door, they see that hidden potential of how much it can boost their brand, their business, the front-facing part of the business for the customers, that it generates a gigantic amount of excitement and really crazy results. And I work in the industry over here in Nevada, and almost everyone that I've worked with has had over a 300% boost in their sales, which is enormous. I've set industry records here, and I've set quite a few records also when I was working with Kay and Jared. One of the cool things was we got involved with St. Jude Children's Research Hospital, and I was talking with my associates at the time. I was running a store about dopamine reprogramming and why it's so important. And I showed them an example, and I went and I sold, I want to say I sold like 1,200 or 1,300 stuffed animals for the kids at St. Jude from the lease line in the store, while everyone else was having like a 1 or a 2 bear a day quota. So it's about putting new behaviors into place. And if you can do that with one thing, you can do it with another. So I think that's a really important thing to learn. And so I bring that to all of my clients and people that I work with, and that's going to do that.
So then how do we find you? I know you're big on LinkedIn. I see you everywhere, Facebook. So how do we find you?
I think the easiest way to reach me is just at my email address, which is just my first and last name with a period in the middle at gmail.com. But I did also provide a link to you, and that kind of gives a sample of my, some of the public speaking that I've done, the interviews that I've done, and I think and my contact information as well. So that is available for any of your listeners or viewers.
Okay, so I have one last question, and I usually spin it 2 different ways. We live in a crazy world. We're still living in a COVID world. Like one of my friends, he was the Iron Chef, Simon Majumdar, said, over the last couple of years, we've lost over 100,000 restaurants in the United States alone. So we have a lot of people that are unemployed, that are driving for Uber, DoorDash, whatever. So if I ask the average American to do something in 7 days, they're never going to get to it. But if I ask somebody that's listening to our show to take an actionable step in the next 24 hours, they're more likely to do it. So if somebody in the next 24 hours, if somebody is struggling as a parent or as a person that has autism, what can they do in the next 24 hours to get some help? And second of all, if you own a business and your business is struggling, what can you do in the next 24 hours to get some help?
Well, I think that there's 2 approaches that work really well. One of them is you go backward from the desired result. So what does the success that you actually want look like? What does it sound like? Let's not talk in indefinite terms. Let's look at a concrete example. Find 3 or 4 examples of people who have the kind of success that you want to have. And then break it down. How did they look at their individual journey? Look at the media, look at the promotion, look at the change in branding, look at changes in location. Look at that evolution and see how it is that they got there. What can you learn from that process? It's easy to say, oh, I want to be on the cover of Newsweek, but have you looked at 3 people who have been on the cover of Newsweek and then gone backward and seeing what it was that put them there? What were the media interviews they did before that? What opportunities did they capitalize on? What new markets did they enter? I think going backwards from that allows you to create a system of steps. And once you have those, you just put them on your calendar and you just take them down. How do you eat an elephant? 1 bite at a time. You take break it reduction to the ridiculous, make the smallest steps as long as you are moving toward your goal, and then put them on a calendar, hold yourself accountable, and make yourself one promise that if I fail to do one of these things on time, I won't do it twice. I will catch up, and then I won't let a second thing happen. I was going to do this on Monday, I didn't do it before next Monday hits, and I have my next goal, and I make time for it. And if you make that promise to yourself, then you will be constantly gaining momentum and learning and moving in the direction towards success, and you won't get that decision paralysis that happens when you get emotionally frustrated. Because once we experience anhedonia, once we get to that place where we start to be fatalistic about outcomes because we're getting jaded or cynical, it can affect our path to success because it takes away our effort. And then the second thing I would say is surround yourself with people who are examples of the kind of success that you want to have. We, I think, often forget as social creatures, as that we are programmed to observe, engage, and experience the behavior of other people that are around us. I think it's kind of a crude example, but one of the things about mirror neurons I think that stand out for everyone is that if you see 5 people who are close friends and standing in a circle and joking around, and you kick one of them between the legs or something like that, you'll see a physical reaction in all of the people in that peer group. And that's because when you have a social peer group, you literally can experience kind of phantom versions of the emotions, even physical sensations of the people in your group. And it changes your personal expectations, your social expectations. If your 5 closest friends are soccer moms and you want to get into corporate acquisitions, you might not be surrounding yourself with the people who are going to create a system of social accountability for you and show you models of success and encourage the kinds of behaviors, focus on the right things that are going to make you succeed. And I think you have to surround yourself, whether your goal is being a really successful parent of a kid with ASD, or being a great business owner, or an entrepreneur, or an angel investor, or whatever it is that you choose to do. You should surround yourself with people that are examples of that success. And it's not that, I hear this smartest person in the room thing. It's not about being the smartest or not being the smartest person in the room. It's about surrounding yourself with people who not only have the skills that you're trying to acquire, but also the mindset and the ethos and the habits that are going to bring the kind of success. And if you do that, social pressure, social accountability, social interaction will help push you in the right direction. So this swimming against the current, you'll be swimming with the current toward your goal.
I love it, brother. I want to thank you so much. I'm so grateful for now that you're in my inner circle, and I'm so appreciative of you, and I love everything you're doing. So guys, definitely check him out. He said it's his first name with a dot, his last name. So make sure you email him on Gmail. If you have him in your life is going to be so much better. Brother,
any way I can.
Thank you so much, brother. Have an amazing weekend. Make sure you stay safe and enjoy it.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me on, Richard.
Are you welcome? Hey, guys, remember, vertical momentum, the only way to go is but up. And like Oprah Winfrey says, the best way to help yourself is to help others. All right, guys, I love you. Happy Labor Day.